And welcome to this episode of the Trust or Bust podcast, where we talk about things that salespeople can do that can break that all important trust, and more importantly, what we can then do to make sure we build it. And so in this session, we're going to be talking about NVC, non-verbal communication, body language. And I know, Murray, this is another of your favorites.
Yes,
How many
for
favorites
sure.
have you got?
Well, anything to do with trust is a favorite for me. But
You-
this one's particularly cool.
It is. It's really important. So, what do we do to break trust? You know, what are the kind of things that are happening that are causing us potentially a problem?
Well, we're going to have to talk. We're going to have to talk about this in the virtual world, right?
Okay. Yep.
There's a lot of things that we could do non-verbally, in in-person meetings and things like that. To be frank, people in sales come up to me and say, what can I do to get better at the non-verbal communication? Or what can I do to get better at the verbal and stuff like that? And my first question to them is, okay, let's talk about how you currently do sales right now. You talked about this in one of our previous videos, right? And it's as if they're trying to heal things by using a scalpel when the broadsword, how do I explain it? They're going for the incremental things, the more complex things to improve sales rather than the fundamentals, right? So get the fundamentals right before you start to look at these things. But nonverbal communication. So in a virtual setting, this is incredibly new, very difficult for a lot of people. Even the experts are constantly sharing, what to do when it comes to virtual meetings, when it comes to nonverbal communication. But it's an area that's still pretty new in the grand scheme of things. So the first thing that I advise people is stop trying to read other people's nonverbal communication in order to understand them, right? And get yours in order first.
Whoa.
Right?
Back up on that one. This is really interesting. Stop even trying to read others and concentrate on your own.
First. Yeah.
First, okay. Whoa. Okay.
Well,
continue.
you're the one who's trying to establish trust, right? So your body language is going to communicate that, not the other person's. And this. There's a person called Mark Bowden who I interviewed on my show, and he's regarded for the last 3 or 4 years in a row by a network of peers. He's regarded as the #1 expert in human behavior and body language in the world. I mean, this guy's fantastic. He's written, I think, four books on this topic. He even trains Zoom employees on this. Right? That's how good he is. Like right. He is known as the best in the game. And I had him on my show, and he's a good acquaintance of mine. And he says, take it from an expert. Don't try to interpret someone else's body language. Like, when they look up and to the right, they're thinking about things, etc. Don't try to do that, right? Instead, tap into your intuition, right? You're going to naturally notice when someone else does something that gives you a cue. Instead, when you notice that, use that as a cue to investigate further, to ask questions, right? So we'll come on to that in a moment, but I just wanted to cover that. Look at your own body language first, right? So the first thing that we have to be clear about is the more of you that is shown, the more we will trust you, because we're not hiding anything. So in the previous video, we talked about verbal communication. I said, in the absence of information, the brain will revert to the negative, right? So the more you're exposing this kind of vulnerable part of your body, Mark Bowden calls this the truth plane, right? These are exposed, vulnerable parts of the body. You're signaling to people, trust me. If you notice in my videos, I'm using gestures with my hand, open palm, right? Trust me, right? I am trustworthy. So you're kind of signaling that in a non-verbal way.
Okay, so this, I'm thinking if we're training presentation skills, that's what we always say. Open gestures, it's to do with the internal organs, isn't it? It's say, look,
Yes.
you know, I know that, you know, you're not going to attack me. I can protect myself. I'm a confident person, etc., etc. This, it makes sense. Why would we not? Why would our brains not be doing that when we're seeing somebody on screen? It's still like, oh yeah, that person is open. That person is not
We're
a threat.
uncomfortable. Yeah, and we're
they're
uncomfortable
comfortable.
on screen,
Yeah.
right? You normally, the video is just, you know, we're like this, for example.
Or you could be very, very comfortable. It's just that your camera is only seeing that. So I actually don't know what you're doing with the rest of it.
And that's
I can't
what
see
we're
your
going
hands.
to. Absolutely. And that's the next thing, because
Okay.
a lot of the times the cameras, you know, it's, so first, so that was the first thing, which is, let's structure this actually. So first thing is, think about your body language first before speaking to someone else, right? Second thing, make sure more of your body is exposed, not just your head, right? Or maybe a part of your neck. Try to expose a little bit more. The second thing is the background.
Mm-hmm.
The background, you know, never before, not really, has the merger between home and work been, that line been really blurred. Now we're inviting people into our home, into our safe space, right? You're seeing things about my home behind you, about my personal life that wouldn't normally be exposed in the work environment. There is a vulnerability to that. And the more that they can see behind you, as long as it's professional, of course, but the more that they can see, the more trusting that would feel, the more inviting you are to that person, right? Whereas when the camera screen is just too close and you can only see my face, or people might blur the background, or they have the company offices, you know, there's virtual office screens and logos. Now, I don't have anything against that, but if you think about how out of place that looks, because we know that you're not in your office, it feels almost as if, not that you're hiding something, but it just feels the logo is just out of place. There's no anchoring to something that's familiar, for example, like a coffee mug that happens to have your logo on it and you drink on it from time to time, has far more impact in terms of trust than your logo behind you, a static logo and virtual background behind you.
Interesting. Right? Or you're pretending that you're sat in a spaceship, or
yeah,
we know you're
obvious.
not really next to Golgate Bridge. Somebody's one day going to go, actually, I am, look. But again, because the brain, that's a lot of unconscious stuff, isn't it?
Yes,
that,
it is.
And I'm with this person, and that's where they operate. That's a real kind of thing. That's them.
That absolutely is unconscious. Yeah, a lot of this is unconscious that we're talking about. You know, the hand gestures we'll talk about, because that's really important, right? So there are several types of hand gestures. You know, there are the baton hand gestures, right? So my hand moves in rhythm with what I'm saying, right? That makes a huge difference. The hand gestures, the control and interpretation of hand gestures is conducted in the same regions of the brain as verbal communication, right? So the inferior frontal and the parietal temporal regions of the brain, they both deal with hand gestures as well as verbal communication. So that means hand gestures are used for communication, right? When they studied the evolution of humans, and they looked at chimps at the beginning, etc., hand gestures was an early means of more complex communication before we evolved into verbal communication. So there is still that subconscious element in our brain, right? So using hand gestures, and they found that when people used hand gestures versus those that didn't, same group of people, right? Same test subjects, same words used. The ones who used the hand gestures were seen as more authoritative, right? They had more trust. They were more of an expert. They were seen more of an expert, and you find yourself engaging with that person a lot more when they're using their hands. So hands are really important, and you want to give yourself the space to do so rather than having to reach up and do that, because that just looks
Jazz hands.
it's like sorry, like you're surrendering, like whoa, it wasn't me.
Have a little dance or surrendering. You're right. Whereas you would normally have them sort of in that, below shoulder line, whatever. So
Yes, so very important to use those hand gestures, and then facial expressions. So if you notice, I kind of pull my eyebrows out sometimes.
yeah,
Eyebrows are when you do that. So I use this quite often. Actually, it's really good when a client gives me an objection, and it might be about money, right? And they say, well, don't really have budget. Could we do something better on the price? Most salespeople go into objection handling mode, right?
yeah.
They acknowledge it and they kind of sidestep it, or they kind of try to deal with it in a certain way. My simple response is, interesting. Tell me more about that. And it's just, tell me more. And it's just, I just lift my eyebrows a little bit because it's curiosity, it's inviting, right? So simple things like smiling.
You also, sorry, just before you go to smile, you also leant forward.
Yes.
Again, people might be listening to this and not see, so that's why I wanted to flag up. So what Moe did was lifted eyebrows and move forward.
Yeah.
You actually put your hand over your mouth. Now, I don't know if that was because you were being thoughtful or whether you do what I do, and that's a learned thing to stop myself speaking at that stage.
No, that's my body language for thoughtful, right? I'm curious. Please tell me more.
Yeah.
And this is why Mark Bowden says, don't try to overinterpret, because there are some things out there when you put your hand in front of your mouth, it's seen as, I can't, you're actually breaking down trust, right? It's almost accused if you're hiding something. But you've got to remember about body language, it's always in the context of something, right? So if and Mark would observe this, if you do that at certain critical points in a discussion when you're talking about something, it might, and there's a continuity there, it might tell them that we're trying to hide something. But if I do it in just isolation there, when I'm like, well, tell me more about that, and then I put my hand in front, that in isolation says, well, it seems like he's curious, right? Rather than
it's pensive. It's pensive. So for me, what I realized a little bit ago is actually you can then literally hold your mouth shut.
Hold your mouth shut. Yeah.
I need to do that.
Yeah. So it's very important that you use your first smile. I mean, it sounds so silly and obvious, but when we're in a tense sales environment and it's online and it's with someone who's really senior, probably a bit scary, it's a critical moment in the sales process, we don't tend to smile because it's very serious, right? We are here to do business, and then like that's the way to go down. But why not smile? Right now, again, remember matching and mirroring. If you're with someone who really doesn't smile, doesn't really enjoy it, I'm not saying be the same as them, but I would recommend smiling a bit more. Smiling has an element in the brain where we're really deeply wired to respond positively to a smile face. There's so much research out there that's really interesting. I won't go into it because it can get quite technical. But just remember that your brain is wired to respond really positively to a smiling face. And that happens at about 4 to 6 weeks of your very existence on this planet. So at 4 to 8 weeks old, you are wired to respond to that smile. Because in the early days, you can't actually see colors very distinctly. You see shapes and you see movement. But you are wired to actually, when you see that, you respond in kind, right? Or you reach out, or you just look to that area as a baby. So it's really, really important. At some point, if you keep doing it, the other person will smile or relax, right? So don't worry if you're faced with someone who's very stern. Just smile, right? But be authentic about it, right? We will notice very quickly when you've got a fake smile on. Just be authentic.
Cool. So we concentrate on ourselves first. How much we are showing of ourselves, so that again that will help people read us better.
Yep.
Background, when we're talking virtual, is a big insight into ourselves, and it is all about that kind of credibility, authenticity thing that we're trying to instill.
Yep.
Hand gestures then, which because we've got cameras positioned well, we can bring into play. And the face, because it is still going to be a major part of what's going on the screen. And
Yeah.
again, we're just wired so much to be reading those.
Yeah, faces are very important. Faces denote trust. There's research, for example, that when you have a website, the more faces there are on the website, apparently the better that is, because we're wired to recognize faces and trust in it a bit more. So your face has become even more important in the virtual world, because there's just less of you that the person can see, right? So yeah.
And that's why introduction videos are very popular now.
Yeah.
It's not ego stuff. It's because it works. People want to know, who are they speaking to, who's there in the company. And that's a whole different podcast, where how to use video website and video within selling, so
yes, exactly. And so the aim of the game is for you to present yourself as trustworthy, someone that the other person can feel at least subconsciously comfortable with, right? That is stop trying to interpret someone else, right? Use it as cues to explore further, and just say, Fred, I get the sense there's something about this that you're not comfortable with, or I get the sense that there's something that, use it as a cue to ask more questions, to understand and get confirmation, but make sure that you are presenting yourself as trustworthy. That is really, really important. In some ways, more so than trying to interpret the other person.
Brilliant. That is a good, there's some really good advice there, which hopefully people can take and present themselves better by focusing on themselves.
Exactly.